Welcome to a very exciting session as we're going to talk about Canadian sports betting, something that just recently was passed. And I've got two great experts north of the border from me. Paul, Nick, can you say hello and just introduce yourselves to the audience real quick? Paul, we'll start with you.
Sure. Paul Burns. I'm President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association.
Nick?
I'm Nic Sulsky. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for PointsBet Canada and the first Canadian employee for PointsBet up here.
Well, congratulations. And for the record, by the way, my name is Brendan Bussmann. I'm Partner and Director of Government Affairs with Global Market Advisors. Paul, I'm going to jump to you first because I think you should be able to at least take a victory lap for a lot of work and a lot of effort over what got done. Sort of give an overview of not only where we're at and what got passed, but obviously how long it took you to get there and take that victory lap a little bit.
It was over 10 years to get this done. 3, maybe 4 bills. We had I've always remarked to people, it was really for something everybody agreed should get done, took an awfully long time to make it happen. And laterally we had a strong coalition of from not only the gaming industry, but from amateur sport, from communities, from business and labor organizations, the provincial governments. So it was a wide array of people that came behind this and stayed behind it, and literally stayed behind it for the last decade. The last group that came to the table were the North American professional sports teams. And they didn't lobby aggressively against this before. They just really let their opinion be known and kind of let it go. And they were willing to content to see whatever the parliament decided to do in our previous attempts. But this time they got behind it, and they were in strong. The Canadian Football League in particular and the NHL both appeared in front of the various committees, made their views known. There was other written submissions, including the NFL, and but also the Canadian Olympic Committee, Canada Soccer. There was lots from the amateur community who saw the benefits in this happening as well. So it was a long journey. We had this actual bill process wasn't that long. It got interrupted for the pandemic because it was introduced in February of 2020. Parliament really ceased to function in its normal routine until virtually September. And so when things picked up in the fall, it moved fairly quickly. And the government even brought their own bill in behind this to say, we're going to get behind this and do it. And then they subsequently walked away from it, supported the private members bill. And thanks to the work of Kevin Waugh in the House, but also Senator David Wells and Senator Brent Cotter were two in the Senate of Canada. It really needs the shepherding of those two senators made it happen in the time frame that it did. And we owe a lot of thanks to them.
Nick, you mentioned you're the first, employee, Canadian employee, if I can say that right, of PointsBet, one of many companies that's probably going to be interested in this market. For somebody like you that, now sort of has the on-ramp to start moving forward, one, what excites you about the potential for this market? And why is PointsBet interested in expanding their brand, from my perspective, north of the border?
Those are really good questions. I mean, I think I'll start here. I think that the passing of C218, and again, Paul's had Gatorade dumped on him virtually many times, and I'll do it one more time. Kudos to Mr. Paul Burns and all the great work at the CGA. Canadian sports betting in Canada last year triggered about $14 billion worth of illegal wagers, both from the offshore sports betting operators and organized crime and bookies and things like that. What excites me as a Canadian, first and foremost, is that finally this industry is going to be properly regulated and the consumer protections are finally going to be installed by the provincial regulatory bodies who are going to have oversight. Of course, there's lots of conversations around tax revenues and around, the amount of jobs that are going to come into this market, and quite frankly, the significant trickle-down effect that the additional revenues that are going to come into the sports industry are going to have on the grassroots nature of Canadian sport en masse. But I think that what excites me the most about this market, of course, there is there are reports that says that within 5 years, the Canadian legal Canadian sports betting industry could bring into a tune of $25 billion. I think that's from a overall economic impact. It could be even.
Oh, I think we maybe lost Nick. He's frozen. Paul, you're still there, right?
I am still here.
Okay.
Well, it's potential for a big market. There's no question, is what Nick was saying. And it's really, I think when you look at the Canadian per capita spends, we're probably higher than the US, probably somewhere in the same vein as the UK, and we'll be, we could see that growth. So there's lots of room for growth though in the market still, and I think that's what Nick was going to get to, and I'll let him get back to these here again.
Yeah, Nick.
I know. I'm sorry for that. The age of 2021 in panels, right?
Yep.
So yeah, like to Paul's point, and what I was saying is there's not only a significant amount of revenue that's going to be able to be driven into the Canadian gaming industry, tax revenues and jobs, but there's going to be significant impact all the way down to the grassroots level of sport. And from a PointsBet perspective, I'm the first Canadian employee for PointsBet, and we will be building a distinct Canadian business, distinct gaming operation, hiring best-in-class Canadians to operate within this industry and in this country. That is what's so exciting about the opportunity to build that brand in a truly authentically Canadian way to really help prop up the sports ecosystem as a whole.
Well, and I think, both of you have talked about, the opportunity and the market opportunity that exists from a revenue perspective. I always find it somewhat humorous, but not, the gray market's been sort of the standard up there right now, and black market. And I remember when Jersey went live 3+ years ago, and everybody went, so this means I can go to my bookie now legally as opposed to what I was doing before. Paul, let's start with you. Obviously, the regulatory structure is going to matter off of this, and obviously timing to get that in place is key. Maybe what are some of the next steps that we have to focus on now that we've got the legal means to do it, and sort of timeline to get this into a regulated box as opposed to the one that's existed currently?
Well, that's great. The one thing when people can be sure, there's no more legislation required at the provincial level or anywhere else. So it's all regulation. So it's all done and can be done in a very short order. And they've been working on it. So we've been working with, as an industry association, we've had a working group of regulators in industry talking about the regulatory framework for sports in Canada. It will be done on a province by province basis. It will look very different in every jurisdiction because the offering has not been fully fleshed out in many jurisdictions. Ontario because they're moving to their regulated iGaming market, is the big market everybody's focused on, right? It's probably the 5th biggest market in North America. It's got almost 35-40% of the population of Canada. It's a big market. That's what everybody's concentrating on. But there's others coming too, and other provinces are still working through what they're going to do. So you will see this move very quickly in some jurisdictions. BCLC has already said we're going to be out within weeks with some regulation. Other provinces are not far behind. The Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario will probably have their draft standards for sports out in the next 30 days. So, I think by fall, you're really going to see more robust offerings out there in the marketplace right away. And I think that Ontario is supposed to open their new regulated marketplace at the end of 2021. I more of contend that, well, that started last Tuesday. And because there's less of a reason now than there was before for the gray market to not, to stay out of the market. Not that they were, but the fact is that any last impediment they may have thought that they had is now gone, and so it's game on now for a lot of people, which is the reality of we've been living with in this country, and we got to figure that out. I mean, that's where a lot of jurisdictions, they look to the economic benefits that Nick pointed to. How do you realize those? One offering in one market from a lottery corporation may not, in fact, be the right mix. It may be for some, it may not be for others. That's what they've got to determine, because competition in the sports betting marketplace can be helpful. People odd shop, right? Some books do this sport better than that sport. We know all of that. And that's where they got to be cognizant of what's going to happen in the market, because outside of Ontario, everybody can still search for that gray market. It's still going to be there. And so what's going to happen? And that's a bigger question, I think, that lurks over the other provinces outside of Ontario when they have to look at their market.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Paul was saying there, a multiplayer market, what that will do is that will drive innovation. Ultimately, all operators, we are in the business of servicing the sportsman. We want to create the best possible experience to make the experience of loving sports better. So when you don't have a multiplayer market, and I would argue a multiplayer market of regulated operators whose priority are protecting the customers and those experiences, when you don't have those multiplayers involved in that type of market, the innovation that drives better consumer experiences and better product experiences is less vital, right? When you don't have to try and be the best product, well, the desire to spend the time and the money to do that is reduced. And I'm a big proponent in having competition is healthy, because at the end of the day, we are here to service the Canadian sports fan. And if the products can't grow and evolve to do that most efficiently, we're not serving those interests, right?
Well, and I think you bring up a very valid point off of that. And it's something that, we've continually said from our perspective, not only representing clients, but just from a thought leader in this space, is competition is a good thing. And we've run into situations in the United States that haven't necessarily led to a good competitive market and try to keep players out. And I'm not going to pick on any states because there's a host of them that would be that case. But I think it brings up a valid point. And Paul, I'm going to turn back to you off of this, because I think it's something you hit on. Obviously Ontario is leading the way off of this, but as we've been pinged by operators that we know are interested in coming, into the market, how do we see the rest of the provinces coming through and saying, okay, I'm going to adopt, what Ontario does, or, and I think there's going to be some shifting of not only who moves first, but second, and so on and so forth. It's the same dynamic we faced here in the United States. And you have some markets like Texas and California that have been in the waiting, but by God, we got, Wyoming done this year, and everybody's excited over a small market. But, how do you see things shaping out, beyond Ontario?
Well, I think it's going to predominantly be led by the lottery corporations when you look at various jurisdictions. The province of Alberta, for example, put out a request for information back in April, looking for a retail sportsbook offering with a mobile option. And the idea was for retail in a casino environment. Alberta has 27 casinos in the province, a very robust competitive marketplace. Alberta is also one of the provinces that have the highest per capita spends. And so when you look at that and say, in our conversations with the Alberta Gaming Liquor and Cannabis Commission, we said the gray market's coming. They're going to be there. So you have an offering through Play Alberta, your online site for your province, and they're launching that site soon. But you understand that there's a retail component that's important for the casino sector to be able to drive that for their customer in some form or fashion. And you need to put these, give those options to the gaming sector, because that's obviously it's an important part, and it's not all online, not all mobile, but it's also not a lottery kiosks in every corner store either. We think that the casino environment is the best place for it. And to get that right, to give them the option, but also creates that competition within the marketplace. So call it a pseudo tethered market if that's what they end up doing, whether they let in 1, 5, or 10. I don't know what they're going to do yet, But the point is that at least they've started to look at the options. Saskatchewan next door is about 1 million people. The predominant operator there, the Saskatchewan Indian Gaming Authority, is going to be given the mandate for sports and online for the province. Do they have more than one given the marketplace? I don't know. And that's they may start with one. Maybe they'll find out they need another. The others are predominantly going to be driven by the lottery corporations initially, and that's where I think they have to see what the market capture is, what's the growth in terms of their own businesses, and seeing if they're getting it right or not. And I think Ontario's happy to, and the regulator's been sharing, for those who have asked in other provinces, what they're doing in terms of creating a regulated marketplace. But Ontario's going to be unique for North America, right? It's an open licensing system. It's the only place I believe it's going to happen in North America, where literally anybody who wants to come and apply for a license can. And I think that's going to be unique for North America. I think it's going to be the only place that happens. And so others will probably more of a tethered model or a limited offering, and being able to bring that competition and competitive market inside a bit of a ringed fence, which you've seen in a number of the US states where they've invited in 7 or 10 or 6 or whatever the number is of sportsbook operators to just offer sports. And that's going to be key, because in Ontario, the difference is too, the sportsbooks will be able to offer online casino games.
Very good.
Which is
Nick, from your perspective, I'd love to hear, from an operator perspective, as you're looking at the totality of Canada. And obviously, it's no different than you've got down here in the US, you've got small and large states. Same thing with provinces up there. Paul's highlighted some of that. How are you guys approaching this? And obviously don't want to give away the company secret, because there may be some of your competitors listening on this, but would love your perspective of how an operator's looking at the market, as opposed to, somebody that's fought the battle for the last decade plus to get this across the finish line.
Well, I will say this, and to Paul's point, the regulatory framework is still kind of working its way through and how it's going to shake out. We do know that Ontario is going to be first, right? And obviously that market is going to be the initial priority. But I think that this market is unique to the world. Canada is not like the States. It's not like Europe. It's not like Australia. Canada is not just going to be another state. Canada cannot be treated like that. The US, there's a popular adjective to describe the US, where it's a melting pot, right? And you could argue that a lot of the states are also very similar in the US. Yes, there's subtle differences between Ohio and New Jersey, but ultimately America is a melting pot. Canada, on the other hand, is a mosaic. Canada is extraordinarily unique. A sports fan in Kelowna is entirely different than a sports fan in St. John. And there are very few operators that will inherently understand that. From the way that I believe PointsBet Canada is going to approach this market is with that knowledge base. And the reason why, and this is just fact. I've driven every inch of the Trans-Canada Highway. I know how unique this country is. And our goal is to bring an authentically Canadian approach to the market, both because we have a product that we own. We built our own tech stack. We own our own we own our own roadmap, so we can customize our product to the Canadian market. But even more so than that, we have the ability and the knowledge base to not just look at the Canadian market as unique, but look at the specific areas within the Canadian market as unique. It's to a point where Brampton, Ontario is different than Ottawa, right? There aren't that many other operators who actually know that there's a town in Ontario named Brampton, right? So the fact is, I think that what we're going to see in this market, it's going to be highly competitive. I do believe that product is going to ultimately win out, but the exciting thing that this market also has, finally, is provides a platform for uniquely Canadian experiences to be created and put in front of the Canadian sports fan, because we are a great and unique people. And that's what's really exciting to me, is thinking about how to do that, right? It's hard enough just to say it, but then to actually try and do it, right? And that's where the challenge of that is so exciting to me. And I'm excited to see, I hope other operators are listening, because the reality is, more than anything else, I'm not just an operator. I'm a Canadian. I love this country. I want to see this. I want to see the entire ecosystem grow. And the only way that's going to happen is through great competition, is through all of us driving each other, and hopefully all of us putting the consumer first, both from a product perspective, but also from a protections perspective. And I think that's where the gray market operators in the gray space, that's where I start having concerns, because those gray market operators, they do not put consumer protections first. That's just a fact. And so that's where the complications in my head really start boiling up. But ultimately, to Paul's point, I mean, the regulatory framework has not been established in each province. So I hope they do take what happens in Ontario and they do learn and iterate and evolve it. So as the other provinces do, put forth their regulatory framework, that they learn from some of the successes of Ontario, and they also adapt from some of the mistakes.
We're starting to run a little bit short on time, but I want to sort of get one more question and maybe a last word. Let's first focus on a year from now, and I know that was always the benchmark once PASPA was overturned. Now that we're 3 years in, everybody says, "Hey, I can't believe how much the market's grown." The three of us get together again a year from now. What do things look like? Who's live? Who's getting ready to? Paul, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's going to be with Ontario, it's going to be a pretty dynamic market. I think there'll be a lot of players in initially seeing how they do in the first. Well, the level of investment commitment to markets for some who just may come by and visit, to others who are making investments. I think we'll see it all initially. I think we'll see the provinces beyond Ontario take a hard look at where they're at in terms of the product they have, the level of sports betting, the handle that they've seen, whether it's growing the way they want it to grow, because if it's a single offer in their jurisdiction, do they need to make some changes? But I think it's going to be, a very active market. There's no question about it 12 months from now. And I think the handle you're going to see, the legal handle will probably in the $5 to $7 billion range potentially in the first year. I think that's a fair assessment when you see across the country. And then where does it go from there? That's going to be interesting. I think it's a lot's going to depend on whether private operators particularly, are allowed in beyond the province of Ontario. I think that's going to be key to see where the growth is. Nic, same question to you.
No, it won't come as a surprise to you, and surely not Paul, but I agree with everything Paul said. Yeah. And I think the competition is going to be significant. But what I think about is I think about Target. Are you familiar with the U.S. department store Target?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with what happened to Target when they came to Canada?
Yes.
That's what I think about. And for your audience that has not had exposure to the experience that Target had in Canada, Google it. Right? I will not be surprised if we see a number of Targets. Right? And it goes back to what I was saying before. I don't want to belabor that point. It's going to be noisy. There's going to be a lot of competition. I think that I'm more excited to see what this market looks like 2 or 3 years from now, because at that point it'll be a little bit more. It'll be more mature. That we will have what's the right the herd will have been culled back slightly. There'll probably be some strategic partnerships and things like that are in play. It'll be interesting to see how some of the other leagues and teams address which partners they're excited and willing to work with. What interests me is something that Paul talked about, is when Ontario regulates and allows the compliant or the regulated operators and the operators who won't play in the gray space, how will Ontario sports teams, associations, leagues, brands, how will they react to partners of theirs operating in the gray space across the rest of the provinces while Ontario has licenses? That to me is a very interesting question, not from an operator's perspective, but how are the brands who are also creating compelling propositions and messaging for their audience, how are they going to justify to their fans that they've partnered with a company that is operating in the gray space in another Canadian province? If you're speaking about creating a national brand for your sports team or your league or your association, how do you balance that? That I'm very interested to understand. And that's why I think that 2-3 years from now, when more than just Ontario is regulated and you have compliant operators in the space, I think that's when you're going to really start kind of seeing how product is going to put is going to get in the forefront. Because let's face it, when Ontario opens up, there are a slew of gray market operators who will have a significant head start, and you have some other of the compliant operators who haven't entered the space, who have users within their databases that they're going to be able to, from legitimate means, that they're going to be able to turn on right out of the gate. So it'll be interesting to see how, it's not a sprint. We've heard this before. It's going to be a marathon. And what I'm really interested to see, less so about 1 year, because I think Paul hit it. I mean, it's going to be pretty predictable what it's going to look like a year from now. It's 3 years from now. That's what I'm really interested to look at, or really interested to see.
Well, let's pick up the conversation a year from now and 3 years from now. I want to thank you both for your time, and I want to thank the audience for joining us today. And it's going to be an exciting few months ahead. And Nick, as you said it best, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So thank you both.
Thanks, Brendan.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Sorry about my Wi-Fi connection.
Thanks, guys.